Greetings, everyone, and welcome to another edition of Flameside Chats here at Center College. My name is Jamie Powell, and I'm your host, as always, for the evening. And I'm excited tonight for our two guests. We're going to be talking about where the wild things are. No, we're not going to be talking about that iconic classic children's book, but we're really going to be talking about where the wild things are, people. We're going to be doing that with a couple of wildlife biologists who are also Center alumni, and Joe Guthrie and John Hast. So I'm going to introduce Joe Guthrie first. Joe graduated from Center in 2002 with a BA in English, I just want to say. Shout out to the English majors out there. He got his master's in forestry from the University of Kentucky, and during his graduate research there, he tracked the movements of black bears in South Central Florida. The findings from his research formed the basis of the Florida Wildlife Corridor Expedition, which Joe's going to talk about more in just a bit. He and his team are working on a project that's going to be the subject of an hour-long documentary called The Forgotten Coast. But again, more to come from that in just a bit. Joe works at the Nelson Bird Woltz Landscape Architects. There, his work includes research and design for major conservation agricultural projects in Tasmania. He leads research and biological monitoring efforts for a 1,500-acre urban park in Houston, Texas. And he's designing a conservation education center for the Boy Scouts of America. Let's talk about getting around the world. All right, and John Hast is a graduate from Center from 2006. And he had a major in biology, big surprise. His first job as a technician for the Kentucky Department of Fish and Wildlife Resources, John said he spent 2 years chasing elk and black bears through eastern Kentucky. That sounds like a pretty sweet gig, actually. He then went back to school and got his master's in forestry, where he studied black bear population genetics. He now works at the Kentucky Department of Fish and Wildlife as an elk and deer biologist, and he continues to pursue his doctoral degree. So before I turn it over to our two guests tonight, I'd like to remind everyone watching to please join us. We like these chats to be interactive. Please comment in the YouTube comment field or tweet your questions for John and Joe and using the hashtag Flameside, or one word, hashtag Flameside. All right, get those questions ready, and while you're doing that, I'm going to turn it over to Joe and John to get us started tonight.
Who wants to go first, Joe?
I'll turn. Yeah, the floor is yours, John.
Oh, the floor is mine. So definitely, I want to thank Laura and Megan for the invite for sure. And I do want to say that I'm in the library right now, which I didn't recognize. I didn't spend enough time there, and I had dinner at Guadalajara tonight, so my Danville trip's complete. But certainly, thanks for letting us talk. I think this will be pretty interesting. We kind of decided that the best way to start this off was to run through kind of what we've done the last 10, 12 years, and just kind of set things up where we're at now, how we got there, and then at least with my stuff, and I'm sure with Joe's stuff, we can look at some cool photos. So let me get some stuff up on the screen here, and I'll kind of introduce myself as we go. All right, so everybody see a photo with some guys holding some ducks? See it? Maybe?
I've got it.
Okay, you got it.
Yeah.
All right, so just a series of photos, but what I took from Center was a very solid appreciation of science, a solid appreciation of biology, and at the same time, I met a great group of guys. We continue to take this duck hunting trip, up until about a year ago, but nonetheless, my thing that I really grappled with maybe the spring of my senior year was, how do I tie in science and the fact that I like to be outdoors? I mean, this is a pretty typical Sunday morning in the spring down at Cumberland River. 45 minutes from here, that was our escape. You definitely need to study on Sunday, but you also need to get get out, get some fresh air, get away from center a little bit, and this was more or less our escape. And then, of course, through people I met, we've got a fantastic turkey hunting place, and you know, my favorite trip of the year is spending 4 or 5 days down there turkey hunting. So you can tell from these photos that really, to me, I mean, the outdoors and the hunting and fishing plays a big part in my life. But it was truly from center where I understood that science can answer anything, and it should be a guiding principle when you're managing game animals. So one of my first jobs, and we can throw this picture up later because Joe and I both lived in that little camper trailer back there for a time being, but this is a photo essentially of a trash can that was knocked over by a black bear, and it represents black bear nuisance issue, which was one of my first jobs with the Department of Fish and Wildlife. I would essentially be the first call if you were having a bear issue. Along those similar lines, this is a beehive area that we fenced for this old fella. So it was really kind of my first taste of fish and wildlife was the human dimension of it. It was 95% talking and being nice to people, and maybe 5% wildlife. That 5%, you sometimes had to catch the bear. So this is a bear trap that we use, same one Joe used in Florida. Similar type, but we actually had to catch and relocate the bear. So that's the kind of the 5% animal dimension there. But it was at this point that I knew I needed to go back to school. It was that point that I met Joe. He was in the program that I wanted to be in at University of Kentucky, and the whole goal then, and I'm sure Joe's going to elaborate on this, was to put what was relatively new at the time was GPS tracking collars. And our whole goal was to put them on bears and see what habitat bears use, and especially in Kentucky, it was a very new thing. Bears were new at the time, and we really had, we were really just getting baseline information. So you can see here a bear with her GPS collar on. This is a bear that's we use cable leg snares for research. I'm getting ready to hit her with a tranquilizing pole. And I put that up there because I had a center football shirt on, so there was more of those than I thought there would be. But another big component that we did, and when I really knew that the bear world was for me, was we would do winter den counts and basically look at how many cubs the female bears are having, and you can tell a lot about population dynamics off the cub output more or less. But this is me in a den with mama bear, and there's definitely some awesome stories about that. One of my favorite photos of 3 cute little bear cubs. How can you can't deny their cuteness. And then another photo of more cute bear cubs. So I always use these 2 photos in any class lectures I'm doing, so at least people get to see some nice photos. And the other fun part about this is we were doing stuff that had really never been done before in any great quantity. We were in the mountains of eastern Kentucky. We had basically licensed to take a vehicle wherever we wanted to and turn it in destroyed. And that was just part of doing the job. So it was certainly awesome times, but then again, I learned a lot about myself, learned that working with good people was probably the most important thing that you could do. And generally had a good master's experience and had the option to start work on a PhD, kind of completely change gears. And I've been since 2010 working on a doctorate on Kentucky elk, which a lot of people don't know that we have elk in Kentucky, but we essentially about 97 to 2002 brought a bunch of elk back in. They lived on reclaimed surface mines that are predominantly grass in the kind of mountainous eastern part of the state, and nobody done any research on bulls, so I wasn't going to pass that project up. And you can see a variety of photos here. We tranquilize the elk, we pull a lot of samples, and this is really what excites me in this career path is the animal handling end of it. It's being able to touch the animals and take the samples you need, and then as you can see in this photo, they're also getting GPS collars. So you've got that mapping component that we use with bears at the same time. Spent a lot of time. This is Eastern Kentucky on a foggy morning. We tracked all of our animals out of an airplane. Got to see this a lot. Wonderful to see something from the air. But really, to sum up, if I was reading an interesting internet piece the other day that asked doctoral students to sum up their projects in one sentence. And mine is essentially, where do bull elk live and how do bull elk die? This one ended up getting shot but not recovered by a hunter. He's got a GPS collar on, so a lot of that I would pick up road kills. They get tangled in fences. We wanted to find out what was killing bull elk in Kentucky. So I'm nearing completion of the doctorate, fairly close to it, another semester, 2 semesters. But I took a job with Kentucky Fish and Wildlife as a deer and elk program biologist, and one of the big parts of my job is catching Kentucky's extra elk and helping other states start their populations. So we've helped out Missouri, we've established elk in Missouri, we've helped Virginia establish elk, and currently right now we're augmenting the elk herd that Wisconsin's got. So this is essentially a corral trap that we catch them in. Anytime you're moving animals across state lines, they've got to go through all kinds of health testing. We've got a huge facility. We work them through more or less like cattle in a very controlled fashion, pull the pertinent samples, and load them up and ship them off. So this is sort of an aerial view of our elk catching facility, which is interesting. Never dreamed I'd be an elk farmer, but it's certainly exciting work. So with that, I mean, my job duties now with the Department of Fish and Wildlife are anything from answering a hunter's phone call about his license, you know, what kind of license he needs to hunt what, to sending elk to other states. So nonetheless, hopefully that brings you up to speed a little bit with what I do, and I'm going to turn it over to Joe.
Okay, great. Thanks, John. It's really interesting to see these photos of your research and the elk quarantine facility there. Notice that's expanded by about double over the years.
Yeah, yeah.
Looks like it's gone down into the tree line there to include some more kind of shade in the paddock.
Absolutely, needed some trees, needed a little more space.
Yeah, I was around with John in the first year when they were really beta testing that system, and remember the trials and tribulations of losing a lot of elk, having a lot, you know, figuring it all out, and that's a important aspect of, I think it's an important aspect of, you know, population management, especially when you're handling large numbers of animals like that. It's really interesting to see. And the aerial aspect is cool too. So I'm going to bring up my PDF, and if there are any issues, please Jamie, let me know. Have you got that now? Is that up, or am I not sharing yet?
No, not yet.
Okay, let me go to screen share.
Take your time.
Got it.
Okay. So just as by way of introduction, my name is Joe Guthrie. I am 35. I went to Center from 1998 to 2002. And as Jamie said in the intro, I was suggested I have gone a little bit of a non-traditional route to get to the world of conservation biology and wildlife biology. But in kind of the circuitous kind of route I've taken, it's I've managed, I think, to weave together the kind of the background training in some of the, you know, in the arts and communication. That training that I got at Center has really served me well. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about first my time at Center, and then time at UK doing grad work, and then the projects that I've taken on since that time. So I, much like John, came to Center from a a rural background. I grew up in Henry County, Kentucky, which is kind of north-central Kentucky, a little bit east of Louisville, a little bit west of Lexington, and grew up in the woods chasing smallmouth bass and wild turkeys and hunting deer. And also, I was really lucky to kind of come up under parents who really cared about my exposure to the world beyond Henry County. I didn't have to look too far for inspiration, though. I was an early kind of follower of the Kentucky writer and essayist Wendell Berry. There was also another novel writer in our community named Ed McClanahan, whose friendship I was fortunate enough to have, and those friendships really inspired a interest in literature in me. And so when I came to Center, I was really, I was going to be on the football team. I knew I was going to run track. I quickly joined a fraternity, and so I gave myself a lot of stuff to do, and I gravitated towards what I was most interested in, which was writing and English, and I did okay at that. I feel like I did good work. Really honed my skills as a writer, even though you're 22 and don't know what you had to say yet. But built a ton of really lasting friendships through football, fraternity, and just being invested in the life there at Center. It's something I will always be glad that it's a choice that I would make over and over again. But after Center, I had a stint out west, and I don't have a picture to represent this, but I moved out west to Wyoming, and again, I'm jumping ahead a little bit with my slide, but in Wyoming, I was a rafting guide, and it was at the time I was 22. I newly graduated from Center, and the question really started to dawn on me. Most people, I think, at Center spend a little more time than I did thinking about what to do afterwards. But the question really got kind of urgent at that point to figure out what it was I was trying to do, and the thought occurred to me: well, I'm not exactly a great poet. I'm not just going to come up with brilliant things to write and say on my own. I felt that I needed a trade. I felt that I needed some platform, some trade and some skill in order to write and communicate effectively and be listened to. And it was in Wyoming that I started to really be exposed to the fields of forestry and wildlife study and the larger world of conservation really started to call to me, kind of with a background relationship with the writings of, again, my real life hero and friend Wendell Berry and other writers. And so I gravitated back to Kentucky and struck up a conversation with the biologists at the Department of Forestry at UK, who were shockingly embraced my background, mostly because of Center. I think they were really excited to have a person with background in liberal arts coming to ask about doing a master's degree at Center. And so it wasn't long before I gravitated onto a bear research project that had just been started there by the conservation biologist on the staff, on the faculty at the University of Kentucky, a guy named David Mayer. And Dr. Mayer had just begun a project in south central Florida looking at the kind of conservation status of this very small, very isolated black bear population existing pretty much on private land in Highlands and Glades County, Florida. And it's, the geography is really important. I'll go back one slide to just keep that on there for a while as I explain this. The placement of Highlands and Glades County in Florida is such that the population of bears that's there stands to be kind of a stepping stone between two much larger populations in the state. And I'll show you what I'm talking about in a second. But the work, as John described, involved catching these animals, putting radio collars on them, tracking their movements, really getting into really trying to understand their day-to-day lives and understand their movements and understand their habitat requirements, understand the causes of mortality, understand how they navigate around barriers like roads and human settlement, and it did include some some of the more glamorous work was actually going and doing these dens and getting to kind of understand the reproduction that kind of keeps those populations going. So we would go, and the purpose of these den visits was to change out the radio collars, in addition to getting a feel for how many cubs were being born and collecting some tissue samples to get the DNA. It allowed us to change out those radio collars and continue the monitoring over multiple years, which is really when the data become most useful, when you can figure out what they're doing throughout multiple years. At one point later on in my career, when I was back in Kentucky working for Kentucky Department of Fish and Wildlife Resources, I've again played football at center. I was in Coach Andy Fry's first freshman class as head coach, and so formed some really strong bonds with the coaching staff, both in the track, in track and field, and as well as with the football team. And it was a special treat a couple of years ago in 2011. Coach Fry and Coach Carter Conley, who was my roommate through 4 years at school, came down and ran the trap lines for a couple of days. We had some adventures. I thought I'd throw this slide in there as well. But it's been a really interesting life. Both John and I think would say we've been super fortunate to get to study these animals, spend so much time in the woods, and really start to understand the personalities and quirks and the kind of daily ins and outs of their existence, which kind of I think a lot of people would be surprised to know some of those kinds of things. In the research, as John has alluded to, I was following the GPS track of these animals. So this map, I'll just keep this up here for a second, shows the scale at which one particular animal was using the part of Florida I was studying. So this is South Central Florida. The red dot in the map here is about on the same latitude as Tampa on the west coast, and say Jupiter Island on the east coast. You see Lake Okeechobee in the southeast corner of the map here. This bear used an area about, made a movement of about 600 linear miles in the space of just 6 weeks, one summer. So showing the dynamic of the landscape still being connected despite the roads in the landscape, despite heavy agriculture. This largest green block here is an Air Force base, Avon Park Air Force Bombing Range, which happens to be one of the kind of linchpins of conservation in South Central Florida. So we started to kind of understand how the landscape can still be connected by following the movements of these bears. Each one of these yellow dots represents 1 hour. So you can follow the track of the bear literally, kind of up the spine of Florida. This is I-4 here to give you some more orientation. Orlando is here. This is a Florida Turnpike that takes you to Celebration. That's Disney World. So it's just a really interesting project. But it led me to thinking about the larger context, looking at how these places are connected, thinking about the larger context of Florida and the southeast. This map shows kind of the distribution of bears in Florida. Bears have been really in the news. The Florida black bear has been really in the news of late. The state just reinstituted the first bear hunt in the state over the in 30 years. I guess there was a hunt, really small restricted hunt in the 90s, but for all intents and purposes, bears haven't been hunted in Florida in about 30 years. But thinking about how these populations all connect up. This is again the Highlands and Glades population. Here's the Big Cypress population. These areas in dark red are the core areas for the black bear. And then the tension of kind of Florida being one of the most heavily developed, human-developed states in our country. Florida has now passed New York as the third most populous state in the country. This study shows the kind of current distribution of people in the state, and then projects out to 2060 with the kind of current population growth estimates what will happen in Florida the population doubles to 35 million people, we will lose quite a bit of the habitat that surrounds existing protected areas, which you see in green here. So we started to think about understanding how the bears moved around. We started thinking about, I along with a couple other conservation biologists, started thinking about how the landscape might be connected to support what we refer to as the green infrastructure of the state, existing conservation lands, and how they might be connected in the most efficient way to keep the functional ecology, the rivers and lakes and swamps of Florida and the forests and uplands of Florida that are still undeveloped. How do we keep those? How do we keep those somewhat connected and functional for the long run? And so that led to that work has preceded, some of that thinking has preceded me by many years. But along with my couple of fellow conservationists, Carlton Ward and Mallory Dimmitt, who you'll meet in a while, we started thinking about how we might bring some publicity to these places, and that led us to what we called the Florida Wildlife Corridor project and expedition. So we took this science-based map of the best remaining unprotected and protected areas and commissioned an artist to do a watercolor rendition of it, to kind of take some of the science out of it and start to appeal a little bit more to people's artistic side and kind of go after their interest in culture and interest in conservation with this a very, very carefully thought out campaign and expedition. So in order to highlight, like I said, we started an expedition, and this expedition, the first leg of which took place in 2012, went from the southern tip of Florida, walking, paddling, kayaks and paddleboards, and biking up the spine of the state through these protected and unprotected areas, private land, public land, military properties, and wherever we were welcome, as long as it remained in that corridor area. That was a very successful first trip. We were mimicking with this. People like to ask why from south to north. The range of the Florida panther and the movements of the Florida black bear in this part of the state are really confined by development and roads and canaling that we've done to kind of control water in the state and make it settleable, for lack of a better term, for humans. And so these animals in the south of the state are really fairly hemmed in and isolated. So we wanted to mimic that movement that might show how they would change, be able to move up and down the state in order to reach really more like mainland North America, if you will. In 2015, we did the second leg, which we called the Glades to Gulf Expedition, going from kind of the northern extent of the Florida Everglades. The watershed begins actually up here near Orlando, and going all the way to Alabama. So that project just wrapped up. But this, and I'll show you some photos here in a second of the second leg, which we did from January to March 2015. As you can see, again, a little more zoomed in look. Here's Orlando, Tampa, and St. Petersburg here on the west coast. And we went through the area of the state, colloquially, one of the state's areas colloquially referred to as the Big Bend of Florida. Several huge conservation lands here spanning multiple bear populations and covering this coastal flyway, covering a huge number of rivers that are draining out of draining out of Georgia, out of Alabama. Some of this water begins its trek to the Gulf as far up as North Carolina. Obviously, the Mississippi River is a little further west, but thinking, our project really kind of envelops a gigantic piece of the country, the Southeast, and all of it remains connected, but it needs additional protection if it's going to kind of keep its integrity, ecologically speaking. Here's a picture of Mallory and I hiking one leg of the trek this past February through Bradwell Bay in Apalachicola National Forest. A lot of both the treks was spent half in the water, half out of water. We had a couple of deep water crossings on days we were on bikes. We changed modes almost, on average, we'd change modes, I think, every two days or so. So there was a lot of coordination involved. This picture's from one of Florida's freshwater springs. This is at Chassahowitzka National Wildlife Refuge on the west coast. Manatee Springs. This is another really precious place in Florida where the salt water is not far away, but this mixing of fresh and salt water, has been happening for millions of years. But we've reached a point in Florida where there's so much development and there's so much pumping of the water source that kind of the excess nutrients in the water are getting expressed in these springs. The algae you can see in this picture is a symptom of too much nitrogen and phosphorus in the water, and it's crowding out some of the native vegetation that you would see otherwise in this picture. Apalachicola River. I'm going to speed through these a little bit. I know I'm going long, but Blackwater River State Forest on the western panhandle, one of the largest remaining tracts of longleaf pine, which at one point was 11 million acres of the southeast. More than that. Actually, it's well, I've lost track of the number, but it's one of the largest ecosystems in North America. It's been reduced to about 3% of its former range, but it's slowly coming back as we kind of protect more habitat along the southeastern coastal plain. So that's that project, and in 2016 there will be a documentary airing, we hope nationally, to talk about it, to talk about our project and kind of explain the impetus for it. And we hope it'll get good airplay. It'll be on PBS, and that's called The Forgotten Coast. So keep an eye out for that to come out in 2016. And so since the end of that project, I've taken a job in Charlottesville, Virginia, and moved my life from South Florida back a little closer to home, closer to family. But also closer to where the rubber meets the road. I think the Florida Wildlife Corridor has been great for my career, as far as kind of understanding the political issues and the social issues with conservation and big wildlife. But I am a person that likes to be actually working closer to the ground. And though we were certainly in the field a lot with that project, most of what we were doing was kind of advocacy, and obviously those expeditions took a ton of planning to pull off. So you spent many long hours a year, really, of office time doing the coordination and fundraising and all the different office work you had to do to be able to pull it off. And so now I'm in a position where I can have a little bit more direct hand on conservation projects, particularly on private land. I mentioned the private land aspect of the Bear Project in South Central Florida, and that really is where my heart is. I see a lot of future for the field of conservation in working with private landowners to restore parts of their properties and ensure the kind of the biodiversity of private landowners. So I'm working for one of the landscape architecture firms in the world that is really pushing this ball furthest and fastest. Nelson Bird Wolf's really focuses a lot of their energy on restoration projects and designing wildlife corridors to keep these places connected, even though they may be small. Maybe they may be on the scale of a couple hundred acres or less than 100 acres. They can be up to the scale of many thousands of acres. This is a project I'm currently working on with the Boy Scouts, as Jamie mentioned, in Beckley, West Virginia, designing a sportsman's complex where scouts will get their safety training and also learn about the legacy of conservation in the United States and in the Boy Scouts. So, with this kind of approach, melding the science world with the design world, The hope is that we can impact the field of landscape architecture and push more landscape architecture firms into doing doing deep research to figure out the science and conservation concerns for their projects. It's a natural, to me, it's a natural fit, but there's not much of a guidebook for how you bring a conservation biologist into the practice of landscape architecture, which is a whole huge other discussion we don't have time to get into, and I've gone kind of long, but thanks for everyone's attention, and I really appreciate the opportunity. I certainly wouldn't have been able to kind of navigate this this professional life without being a good communicator and a good writer, and none of that would be possible if not for Center, the professors I had from history, like Mike Ham, and in the English department, like Milton Riggleman and Mark Lucas. Gene, they left a huge mark on me. And there was one, I did take one conservation biology class at Center. I forgot to mention, I meant to mention it earlier, but probably one of the bigger influences in my life was an adjunct professor at Center named Gene Porterfield, who was only there for maybe two years. But I took her conservation biology class along with maybe 4 other students, and I did this case study of the Lahontan cutthroat trout, and it was really an eye-opening experience for me. I don't think I did particularly well in the class, but it opened my eyes to a whole nother field, whole nother world of study that I found really compelling, and that's how I really started down this track. But thanks for the time, and throw it back to John and Jamie.
All right, thanks a lot, Joe. That was really interesting, and we have several questions lined up for you. But first, we're gonna hit John up with a couple of questions that have come in from the online audience. This first one is a bit of a paraphrased question from Benny Klossing.
I can't imagine what this would be.
Well, and I'll add a little bit of my own question to this too. So
okay.
He's asking, what do you recommend we do about wildlife nuisances? And my part of this is, from the bear perspective, isn't it really a human nuisance?
Yeah, absolutely. And then, as I said earlier, that's what I learned, early on in my career, that I would say a good 98% of all bear nuisance problems can be solved by, it's something the humans doing. Their trash is out on the wrong day. They're feeding their dogs in the backyard, and the bear comes and eats out of the dog bowl every day. And that's definitely something I try to impress upon the young people in this career I talk to. In the old days, it was all like sit on top of your Land Rover and count zebras. And, 90% or more is dealing with people, and it's the rare day that you actually get to deal with the animal, and those are the days that you really enjoy. So.
Yeah, we John and I, he mentioned we had the same job in Eastern Kentucky, living in a totally condemnable, roach motel of a little travel trailer, fifth wheel travel trailer that sat at the mouth of a deep coal mine in Lynch, Kentucky, and I think John would agree that it's just one of the most beautiful, incredible landscapes that any of us have ever seen, and unfortunately, it's a place with a lot of poverty issues and a lot of kind of place where people struggle to kind of keep keep the nuisance issue at bay with the black bear, and so it's really where we kind of honed a lot of people skills that keep us going in our career today. But I think having a background at Center that taught you how to think critically, taught you how to work in collaboration with people, made us good candidates for that job, and helped. It was a stepping stone. It was not a glamorous job at all, but was essential in getting us going in our careers, both of us.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Here's another question, sticking with the black bears in Kentucky theme. This is from Sam Dickinson.
Okay.
I don't know if we need to laugh or anything. Okay, all right, fine. There have recently been a number of black bear sightings in south central Kentucky, which is an area not typically known for this. What's causing this? What is it? What do you think this means for the region? Is this good? Do we need to worry? Guys, got any thoughts on this?
Yeah, so the beautiful thing about the black bear, they came back on their own for the most part in Kentucky. So throughout the 1900s, they were hunted for fur, for meat. You know, of course, Daniel Boone coming through the Cumberland Gap found elk, deer, wild turkeys, bears, and that pretty much supported the early people. But they were over-harvested, essentially extirpated from Kentucky, and over time, with us conserving land, when habitat came back, the elk, the biology term is they recolonized back into Kentucky, and that really, you know, when I started bear research in 2007, 2008, it was a very new thing. Bears were fairly new, like in the last 5 to 10 years, and that certainly hadn't stopped. If you think about dropping a golf ball in a pond or something, the ripples kind of move out away from where you drop it. That is still happening. They're still moving. We've got great habitat, especially south of Danville here, Casey County. Any good timbered habitat can certainly hold a black bear. So the sightings out of what we might traditionally think as Appalachia should increase as we go on with time, for sure.
Yeah, and most of those individuals that are what we call dispersing, leaving the home range that they may have inherited part of from their mother. Most of those individuals making the longer range dispersals, like I showed with M34 map, they're typically subadult or young adult male bears. Mm-hmm. So on the colonizing front of any bear population, you're likely to find more males than females. That's usually the way it goes, and consistent with the subadult of other species. Those bears are often getting into trouble. They're unfamiliar with their landscape, and they may be they tend to be very visible because they're searching around for a place to fit in. They're searching around for a place where they're not going to come into contact with other more dominant bears. They're searching around for places where they might find a mate. Mm-hmm. So they tend to be very visible. People think that people love to say we've got tons of bears, especially on that kind of colonizing front. They say we have tons of bears out here, and it's more likely that they're seeing 2 or 3, maybe even one bear that's just hanging around trying to figure it out. I don't know. What do you think? Yeah, I think John would probably agree there.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's unfortunate that these young males that disperse out end up on the front bumper of a car more often than not. That's the unfortunate fact. They're lost. They don't understand roads. Mm-hmm. And, that's normally how the situation ends.
One of the wilder stories from my time in the job as the bear nuisance biologist with the state, I think was in 2010. When we had the state's first documented bear attack, where a hiker in Red River Gorge came into contact with a bear. He found himself he had followed a bear for several hours watching it eat blueberries, and then found himself on a really narrow little saddle trail. And the bear decided that the guy was either threatening him, threatening his access to the food, or he was just a really hungry bear. Anyway, he attacked the guy. John and I spent a couple of days helping KDFWR set traps for this bear that was never actually caught. It was a young subadult male that was on that colonizing front, because even today I think there's probably very few females that have reached that far north.
Yep.
But they're definitely transient males moving through.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I think the moral of that story is don't follow a bear.
Yeah, yeah. It was a smaller bear. It was not kind of an unassuming male. John I think it was probably about a 150-pound bear, but they're a formidable animal. And that bear, there was a funny time. That bear was being run by a team of they were chasing it with a team of dogs, and bear managed to run up a tree. He ran up a tree. The dogs treat him. But then a dog from a neighborhood nearby distracted the team of track dogs.
That's right.
They left the tree, and the
bear got away.
The bear, just by the skin of his teeth, managed to climb right down the tree and take off. And they never caught that. They never caught that individual. Lucky bear.
Well, let's move on to kind of a bigger overarching question here. It comes in from Jeremy Gomez, and it's for both of you guys to weigh in on. What do you view the role of the federal government to be in wildlife protection?
You want to give it a shot there?
I'm here. It's politics season here, and I like small government, but there are absolutely things. The CITES program probably being the #1 important thing, and that's essentially dealing with threatened and endangered animals and how they're processed. Kentucky, I think it's bobcats and otters. If you do harvest them, you've got to get a CITES tag before you process the fur, and it's just a way of managing these more sensitive species. And then I think with the waterfowl stuff, you've got a duck that flies between, 3 Canadian provinces and 7 southeastern states. There's no way the states can manage that on their own. So definitely a role, but I don't, it's one of those things. Every state in this country does a fantastic job at managing the wildlife they've got amidst political brush fires and everything else. So I think the two have to play a role together, the state and the federal.
Yeah, it's a big challenge to tackle in our time. We have across the country and internationally giant problems with the loss and fragmentation of habitat, the impacts to critical habitat for species that we don't even know yet. All around us at any time, there's we may only know 50% of the life that's around us. One thing I think that gets lost on a lot of people is how little we actually know about life on Earth. So the role of the regulatory bodies is not a popular. These agencies like U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service are not popular bodies in today's day and age. In the halls of power. The U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and the EPA have become real punching bags for legislators in the state houses and legislators in the federal government from both parties. And I think that's unfortunate because we've allowed it to become like this politicized thing, where conservation has become this highly politicized thing. So I really think that the future again is in conservation on private lands, and there's certainly a big role for agencies to play in that, doing conservation easements, working with landowners to incentivize conservation. There are just some things that that only the federal government can do, and certainly you're right about the work that the states do. You're right about the work that nonprofits do. But there are some programs like the Farm Bill and USDA's work through the Natural Resource Conservation Fund that do incredible work over many hundreds of thousands of acres, and that has to go on because we are not protecting enough of the planet yet. There was a paper that just came out this past March that showed how there's been a disproportionate investment in conservation in the western half of the country by the federal government, when the greatest mass of kind of biodiversity is concentrated in the southeast of the country, of the North American continent, and there's a huge disconnect there, and it's kind of an all hands on deck time for conservation, for the community of conservation agencies and nonprofits. So the federal government has to play a role, and they should be in a leadership role actually. But that is difficult for big agencies to mobilize.
Okay. Got a question here from Jacob Marfis. I hope I'm saying that right. I'm just going to read it. It's a little bit of a setup. First of all, he wants to thank you, Joe, for your work on the Florida Wildlife Corridor. Listening to Mr. Carlton Ward talk about the project is what got me interested in conservation wildlife biology. I would like to hear Joe's thoughts, and also yours, John, as well, if you'd like to weigh in on the recent black bear hunt that took place in Florida.
Sure, and this has just been a big topic lately. There was a cover page story in the New York Times about the hunt just a couple of weeks ago. The bear hunt started on Saturday this past weekend. The state decided to hunt 3 of those populations. I showed the map a little earlier. There's about 7 disjunct populations in the state. They decided to hunt 3 of them with a total a quota of 320 bears. That hunt was halted. It was due to kind of last 7 days. They halted it last night when they started getting really close to the quota, assuming that it was going to go over the quota if they allowed any more hunting today. My position in this, I did a lot of research on just one of those populations, which was not a hunted population. My position about this throughout the kind of controversy has been that we need the best available science. We need the most recent updated numbers, and unfortunately, that was not seen through to the end. The state is still a year away from having their final count. They made use of their old data that showed kind of the population numbers and trends as of 2002, but there's current field work going on that's been going on for the last 3 years. But unfortunately, I think there was quite a lot of pressure on the state agency to institute a hunt in reaction to some nuisance issues and some bear attacks that happened in the state, due to people feeding bears. And again, it comes back to that issue of needing to manage people more than needing to manage bears. So I commend those regulators on kind of on their effort to crack down on the communities that are causing the issue where bears are getting human food. But more needs to be done. More certainly can be done to treat those issues in the places where there are really bad problems. I wish that they had waited. They could have waited 1 more year to institute a hunt. I don't have a hunt I'm a hunter myself. I don't have a problem with hunting bears, but I really think this was mishandled. This is a case of the state mishandling the resurrecting a bear hunt for Florida.
Yeah, and I'll just, I'm kind of on the line on the Florida bear hunt. I'm not exactly completely up to speed with it, but what it always seems, and what can be frustrating for us as the biologists, is that there's a number of filters. You can have the best data in the world, but to pass that on directly to the management of the animal, you get into, this job that I'm in right now is my first introduction to state politics, and that's a new, and it's exciting at times, but it's something you've got to learn, and it's not, and it's with any other branch of science. The best science in the world, if it's an unpopular stance, you've still got to get it out there, get it publicized, and get the ball rolling on it. One thing, thinking back to what Joe's done, and also you mentioned Carlton, Getting to know those guys was my first introduction into how to get the word across, essentially. So, I mean, Joe's a great photographer. I picked up photography. I understand how important, if you're giving a lecture, giving a presentation, or doing something like we're doing right now, talking about conservation in Florida can be anything, how a good photo, a good, well-written paragraph, how that gets the point across. And that's what those guys did well with the Florida Wildlife Corridor expedition. The bear hunt issue in Florida would be very one-sided if they didn't, if they weren't picking up the, habitat connectivity, that side of the argument. So it's been very interesting from my perspective to pick
Thanks.
up.
Well, you're underselling the impact, the influence you had. I think I bought my first camera I bought from you.
That's great.
So yeah, I was, motivated after seeing your kind of engagement with it. And it's a great tool for being in the field. So you come back to a world where you can bring this kind of artist's eye to your field work in order to communicate about, and you end up using all those photos in your talks and your various places that you need them, even in your papers. They can be super useful. So so yeah, that has been a real source of satisfaction for me, that we've been able to hone in on a message and then communicate it, through pictures, through text and the spoken word, but really comes down to getting images to help you communicate. And Carlton, whose photos I showed in the slides, is the man at that.
Well, and I think I'd like to just remind everybody in the audience too. The trailer for that documentary film, Forgotten Coast, is the power of the visual that we're talking about. There's the science, and you can read a lot, you can hear a lot on the news, but just watching that trailer just gave me absolute goosebumps. And just the power of the beauty of Florida. I mean, a lot of times people just think, oh yeah, Florida, Disney World, Disneyland, whatever's down there. Right. Just that trailer just totally captured me. So I just would encourage everybody to follow the link that they got in the email from Megan from the alumni office, or if you don't have that email anymore, just maybe Google Forgotten Coast. Please watch that trailer. I'm really looking forward to seeing this film on PBS. Do you have any? Is there like a date range when that's going to be airing that people can watch for?
I can't make any promises about when it'll air in Kentucky or Virginia, where I am. We're premiering it in Tampa. WUSF out of Tampa is the presenting station, so it'll air in Tampa starting November 19th, and it'll go around Florida for a little while. The way these things work is they play in Florida for a little while before they're released outside. And so in 2013 we had a earlier film in 2013 called The Florida Wildlife Corridor, Everglades to Okefenokee, and it played, I think, in 16 states. It played in every single household in Kentucky. My dad made sure to call his friendly programmer at PBS, and I don't know. I maybe should pull back from saying he was responsible for getting it played everywhere, but I know that other than Florida, the only other state where they played it in every household was Kentucky. So the high hopes that it will go, make it that far. I think there's a really good chance that it will play in Kentucky in 2016, and we'll certainly let everybody know.
Absolutely. So just real quick, got a real quick question for you, Joe, from somebody you might know. Milton Riegelman. Like to ask if your interest in bear studies stems from your inability to fully understand Faulkner's The Bear.
Well, maybe, I don't know. I don't know if Dr. Riegelman had maybe, I can't remember if we taught The Bear in our Major American Writers class. Again, just a class that has stuck with me, a lecturer who's stuck with me for my life. I think that's not unique among among center graduates. They form relationships with the instructor and their material. But that's Yeah, I can't remember if he actually taught us that. And I was such a bad student that I did not go register early enough to take the Faulkner seminar as a senior. So I was sent to Emily. I had Emily Dickinson as my for my senior thesis, which was great. And I thought I was absolutely convinced that it was the right thing at the time. But I was so late in going register usually that I had to settle for classes that I may have been my second choice.
All right, just a couple more quick questions that I want to ask, and also Matt Hall would like to ask.
Great.
And I'm going to pair it so both of you can answer. So Matt's question is, while on the wildlife corridor, what was your closest near-death experience? And if you didn't have a near-death experience, I want to know your grossest experience.
Oh, man. Closest near-death. Well, this last one we had to deal with the weather a lot. I don't know if you guys remember I'm sure you remember last winter in Kentucky, you guys had -10, -15 degree days. It got pretty cold in Florida too. It got down to the 10 to 15 degrees, 15, 20 degrees a couple of nights. And camping out, 70 nights, I guess we were under a roof for a good number of those. But some of the coldest nights on the trip we were actually camping out. And every night we were out, it seemed like every night we were camping in tents. It rained, it got really cold. But one of the more near-death experiences, I was on the Apalachicola River the first day of our trip down the river, and I got excited about photographing this old, an old derelict barge piling. So I jumped out of my kayak, I pulled up to a down tree, jumped out of my kayak, and kind of scrambled along the stem of the tree to try to get this photograph, and I just totally forgot to tie my boat off. And I turned around and looked, and wind gusts blew up upstream, and the boat came unmoored and started floating upstream against the flow of the current, and out of reach. And it was just by the grace of God that I, managed to run, the other direction down the tree and snag the tow rope as it passed by me on the way to the Gulf of Mexico. So if I had gotten stuck right there, they wouldn't have. It was on the wrong side of the river. It was several miles from where we were ending, and there was no one around me. So it would have been all my gear was on that boat. So that was a hairy one. We had some nights. We had a couple of nights going in the dark. The first trip was a lot more of a slog, just kind of making up the trail on our own. As far as gross, I don't know. I don't think any of that stuff I don't process gross too much in the woods. I'm sure John can his stories about gross. That's who you should ask about stories about gross.
Gross.
He's with You've
right,
basically been the caretaker for quarantined animals for a couple of years there.
Yeah.
Sick. He can win that battle.
Yeah, maggots are a daily thing.
Right.
And that's you're almost completely indifferent to that now. I get home and have maggots and that kind of stuff, like in the cuffs of my pants, and that's just another day at all. But I've got to tell the most harrowing, top 10 harrowing experiences the Jeep on Black Mountain. So as a grad student, it was a daily struggle to keep the vehicle running, and you just hoped. I always told my mom, not going to get eaten by a bear, gored by an elk. The wheel's going to fall off the Jeep. I'm going to end up in the river. But we hop in this Jeep at the bottom of Black Mountain where we live. It's a little trailer, and it overheats like 10 feet from the top and completely seizes the motor, just destroyed. It never ran again, which was fine, for the better. But we thought that we'd at least coast it kind of close to the house. I mean, it was downhill all the way, but I never dreamed that it would make it there. So it wasn't so much dangerous what we were doing with no power steering, no power brakes or anything. It was the fact that we were laughing so hard in the bottom third of the trip. I mean, it's like a 25-mile coast, which, just once we realized we were going to make it, we were laughing so hard that I could not steer, and we were doing 50 down a mountain road and drove it all the way back, pulled in next to the trailer. All of our technicians were down there, didn't know what the hell we'd been doing. Engine never ran 25 miles down the side of Black Mountain. So that was probably my most harrowing story when Guthrie was in the passenger seat. So.
I love it. I love it. All right, guys, this has been great. We're going to wrap it up soon. I'm going to do a little housekeeping here at the end, but I want to go out with one final question for both of you, and you can be thinking about that. So what's the next great challenge that you want to conquer both career-wise and personally with sort of what we've talked about today? And then while you're thinking about that, I just want to remind the audience that they can watch this broadcast again. It will be available on the Center Alumni YouTube channel very shortly. It will also post some follow-up information on Facebook and Twitter. And to let everyone know that we're working on the November Flameside Chat, and right now we're working on the theme of gratitude. So be sure to watch for more information coming along on Facebook and Twitter about that. And I'd like to thank you guys for tuning in and watching us tonight and participating with questions. And thank you, John and Joe, for having a really engaging discussion. This has been fun. So before I say goodbye to everyone, I would just like to let you have a chance to answer the question I asked before.
Have at it, Joe.
I am, so I mentioned I'm now working for a landscape architect, and it's a new thing for a landscape architect to hire a conservation biologist to work on their staff. And so I'm occupied with trying to figure out how to mesh the process of doing landscape architecture with the process of doing how you do good conservation biology, and that's a big challenge for me, and that's going to be occupying my time here going forward. I'm also, I still need to maintain kind of a sharpness and engagement with the field of conservation biology. So I have some latitude to continue trying to publish our research from Florida and Kentucky in peer-reviewed journals. That's a major goal I have. And professionally, or I'm sorry, personally, I think I'm ready to live in a place for longer than a year. Start to kind of settle into a little bit more of settle into a place a little bit more. And I've managed to live a gypsy life for quite a number of years now. So looking forward to kind of getting more of a relationship with this place, maybe than I've had with the last few places I've lived.
Awesome. Yeah, so kind of in thinking back on that question to set it up, I mean, the best decision I ever made was coming to Center. And strangely enough, everything I've needed in life, I learned in class, I learned on the football field, and it amazes me how often I draw on that every day. So I really have more or less a debt to pay. But, plenty of people stuck their necks out for me. Center kicked my butt for 4 years. But everything has, the hardest days were here. Anything can happen. So what that, I guess, did for me is I constantly need a challenge, which is, possibly a fault. But nonetheless, short term, get my doctorate done. I have to get it done. And then long term, make a difference doing what I've discovered I'm good at, and make a difference for the people of Kentucky in regards to the wildlife in our state. So that's my main goals. May change, but nonetheless, it all got catalyzed by 4 years of being here, without a doubt.
Awesome. Well, that's a great note to go out on. And again, guys, thank you so much. This has been a really enjoyable discussion. I could talk to you guys all night about all things nature. So
Awesome.
Thank you joining us, and we'll just tell everybody goodbye and check back with us in November.
All right. Thanks, Jamie. John,
right.
It's good to see you.
Yep. Take care, guys.
See ya.